conversation.
Yeah, because even for my own events, I don't send questions ahead of time. I refuse to do it. I won't do it.
Cool. As cheesy as this sounds, I really like the Joe Rogan and how he does, and I mean, I'm not lying. I basically have tried to copy that a little bit. Just having a good, like, hey, we have an agenda. Like, we're going to talk about small business development. Like, we're going to talk about entrepreneurship. We're going to talk about all this stuff. But let's just get together and chat it up and see where we go. So
yeah, I mean, I'm much more of a conversational person. Even when I write conversation.
Oh, I can tell, man. Reading your newsletters is like the best thing ever. The capitalize, the punctuation. I could just like hear you just
I get so many comments on that. You know, that I bold it and underline it, and the people read it like I'm yelling at the reader. I was like, well, I've got to find a way to emphasize what I think you need to pay attention to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to shrink it a little bit. People complain that my newsletters are too long, which I understand. But if there's valuable information, why would I leave it out?
Right.
You read what you want to read within the newsletter.
Yeah.
But, you know, some people, a conference and meeting investors in Atlanta is really important, right?
Right.
And for someone else, you know, it's not. So skip that part of the newsletter and yeah, whatever.
And I mean, it might be long, but in all reality, like, if you wanted to really read every word, you could probably read it in 3 to 5 minutes.
Right.
So it's like, but also, you know, I get so many newsletters, I get so many updates, and yours is one of the few that I like actually, like, no matter what I'm doing, I see it come through. I'm like, all right, I'm reading this.
We have great readership. I mean, we have 40% readership. And then we resend it. I changed the subject line to catch the one.
I was like, have I seen this before?
And then I get another 15 to 20% readership.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming on to the podcast, and thank you for everything that you've done here in Wilmington and what you've built. And part of this conversation is I don't even know, honestly, the full extent of what you've done. And I really want to learn more about you. I want to learn more about what you've done. But just like a little kind of monologue before I hand it over to you to introduce yourself is I was having lunch. Actually, no, I was having beers and oysters with Dallas Romanowski.
Yep.
He's kind of one of my unofficial business advisors where I'm like, hey, I'll pick the place, I'm paying, and let's go shoot the shit.
I call those people kitchen cabinet. Like, they're not your official board of advisors, but you kick around a beer and you talk about the issues that you're dealing with.
Yeah. So Dallas and I were talking about stuff, and as we were talking, he sent an email to connect you and I, like literally as we were talking. And I remember, and you responded real quick. You're like, all right, yeah, you know, our investor buzz-in is tomorrow.
Yep.
And we need an accounting sponsor.
Right.
I was like, damn, I hear you, Jim. Just like getting right to it. And and I was like, all right, like let me at least like come check one out first. And I went, and I was just like truly amazed. I was like, the quality and the quantity of people in this room. I was like, holy shit. I came up afterwards. I was like, I'm writing you a check. You know, like I'm in, man. Like, you know, and we did, and now we're here. So
that was a very special event. We had 280 people packed into the Ironclad Brewery. And, that was the largest event we'd ever had by 30 people. So our last 4 or 5 events going back from September, October of last year are 250, 250, 230, 280, 150, you know, the biggest events we've ever had. So things are rocking and rolling in the Wilmington ecosystem, and I'll give a lot of credit to Dallas. Dallas ran an angel investor network when I first recruited here in 2013. It was called the Cape Fear IMAF Fund.
Okay.
So IMAF is the Inception Micro Angel Fund, IMAF.
Yep.
And there was one at every university across the state, every state-funded university. And he was the leader of that angel fund, and they were investing locally, which was really important. And eventually they invested in Next Glass, which is a company that became Untapped, and Untapped had an exit. Yeah. So that was really the validation of a lot of the work that we had done, because I had met George and Kurt Taylor when they were a father and son team with an idea for Next Glass. and had launched, but the app wasn't live, but the idea had been worked on. And to see that go from ideation to exit is exactly what an ecosystem is around to do. And I was as involved as I could be without being on staff.
Yeah.
I was doing a lot of media relations, a lot of media introductions for Next Glass, and doing everything I could without stepping on toes, because I needed a win. I needed a win for Wilmington to prove to other entrepreneurs and other parts of the state that we had a valid ecosystem that we were building.
Yeah, and that was a technology company, right?
It was. Next Glass started as an app for wine lovers, and could an app learn your taste profile for the wines that you liked? So if you went to a wine store and they didn't have your favorite bottle, but they had similar bottles from the region of the bottle that you liked the most, you could hold the label up to your phone and the phone would scan, and then it would scan the database for your taste profile and what other people had said about the wine and try to match. It would say there's an 85% chance you'll like this bottle of wine based on other wines that you've had. And that was the theory of Next Glass. And then according to George, it didn't really scale after launching the way they wanted to, so they chose to acquire a company called Untapped, which had offices in New York and LA, and that let them get access to the talent that they didn't necessarily have access to in Wilmington, plus a growing client base. So that actually did really well, and of course led to an exit from a private equity firm in Boston.
That's awesome. It's so what? Let's start. What is new? And when did it start? How did it start?
Yeah.
Tell us.
So New is what's called an entrepreneur support organization. So for the last 25 years, I've been doing this work in other parts of the state. So I started the first tech entrepreneur council in Charlotte. I was recruited to Asheville to start the first tech entrepreneur council there and an angel investor network. I worked in the Durham area for a little while and then got recruited here to UNCW to open the CIE. So I was the first executive director here in the CIE.
Oh my gosh.
So what is New? What is an entrepreneur support organization?
Yeah.
New is the Network for Entrepreneurs in Wilmington, so NEW. And we are what I call the CED of the coast. So CED is the Entrepreneur Support Organization in Raleigh-Durham. It's now 40 years old.
Got it.
Okay? So they're one of the first organizations in the world to just be there to support entrepreneurs, to make introductions to capital, to do some mentoring, to do communications, meaning media relations and newsletters on a website, and those kind of things in support of entrepreneurship. And they are the model for everything that I'm doing. I just do it in a coastal way with a little more freedom and independence, and a tone that I think that entrepreneurs understand. Entrepreneurs speak in 4-letter words, and that's why our events have so many 4-letter words, and it just works that we have events that move at a quick pace, that speak in a tone, that are high energy, and we want the entrepreneurs to leave with every event with 3 things they can incorporate the next day.
Yeah.
Or maybe just 3 new contacts that they met that were the speakers. The real value of coming to our events is you get to know the smartest people in the room, because they're the ones asking the questions, and you go, there's 280 people in the room, I can't shake every hand. But if you listen to the questions that are asked from the crowd, you can quickly find out who are the smartest people in the room.
Yeah.
And those are the people that maybe you create a mentor relationship with.
Right.
So the reason we're called New is because we're trying to avoid becoming part of the good old boy network. And that's really the reason for the word new, is I was a newcomer to Wilmington. I was a newcomer to North Carolina.
Yep.
and I wasn't accepted in the good old boy network. You know, I have a Yankee accent from Chicago, and that doesn't work real well in the South. I learned in 7th grade. But, you know, if you deliver value, it really doesn't matter who you are, how you're connected, or what you look like, or what your last name is. And that's what I've been building since 2013 when I opened this facility, and then I started new in 2015 and started Whale in November of 2015.
Okay. You had told me that you opened the CIE, and I knew that, but I kind of forgot until you just said that. And, you know, being here at the CIE for this interview, like I subconsciously remembered, like, but also you're so involved with everything going on here. But
yeah, I'm very involved with 1 Million Cups, which is an event here every Wednesday morning that you've presented at.
Yep.
I'm part of the mentor network here that meets monthly, and so yeah, I'm very involved in the whole ecosystem, involved in the coalition, which is an important part to where it's not just me or not just Heather here at the CIE, but there's 11 other organizations that are part of the coalition of small business resources.
So how the hell do you start an organization like this? I mean, you probably had some experience in different places and maybe a little bit of runway with the CIE, but what did year one of new look like?
It was very hard because we didn't have a lot of financial support because people didn't really know if an independent nonprofit could work. And so we really didn't get a lot of support. We had less than $25,000 of annual total support for the first 5 years of new. So every year we would build up, but the 5th year we got to $25,000, which is a very hard way to make a living, right? Yeah. So, you know, I had saved some money from my time here at CIE, and that's the money that I really survived on for a little while. And it was very difficult. It's still difficult. Yeah. You know, we get no money from the city of Wilmington. We get no money from New Hanover County. No money from the state, but we have sponsors like your firm that help us survive. Yeah, we're not thriving, but we're surviving. Yeah.
Well, I mean, so from that to now, how many annual sponsors do we have now? Is it 30, 35?
Yeah, around 30, 35. Okay. Yeah. So there's 2 levels of sponsorship: an annual sponsor and a title level. The title level sponsorship allows you to have vertical exclusivity. So if you're, you know, a commercial real estate firm and you don't want any of your competitors to be mentioned along the sponsors, then you would choose to get that title level sponsorship.
Got it. And then also, you know, there's a bunch of partners that kind of help out, like Ironclad, for example. They're, you know, hey, come have your event here, and, you know, I'm going to sell a bunch of beer, for example.
Yeah, we're very lucky to have a partnership with Ironclad Brewery. They allow us to have our events there, and they sell as much beer as they can for, you know, 2 hours. But it works out. I mean, entrepreneur, like I said, you know, the 4-letter words, and beer is a part of those 4-letter words that makes up the tone and the energy of our events. And you know, I mean, it sounds very funny, but we probably have 25 to 30 people that make a trip from the Raleigh-Durham area for every event that we have. That's, you know, amazing. A significant number of our sponsorships come from Raleigh-Durham, so they want to get value for their sponsorship. So they make the trip, but there's also entrepreneurs that come down. I mean, we can talk about this if you want to, but the reason we have most of our events on Thursday is so our speakers that we invite from Raleigh-Durham that are the investors. Well, most investors also have a beach house that they never get to go to. Right? The family enjoys it, but the spouse that chooses to make the money for the family, the breadwinner, rarely gets to come to the beach house. So if we invite the investor to come and speak at 4 o'clock, they can make it a weekend with their family at the beach house. They can spend Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And so the truth is, we hope it rains on Friday, and they won't have much to do around Wilmington. So they'll call up the entrepreneurs they've met at our event and say, let's go have a coffee, let's go have a beer. I'm not joking.
Yeah, no,
I'm very serious. Yeah. I actually hope we on the day we have events, I pray for rain so they won't go fishing or they won't go,
right, exactly.
The Carolina Beach and the tiki bar and have a cold beverage and a fish taco and look at the pretty tourists. I want them to come to our events, but again, we try to have a good time. There's so many business events that are really boring and they're going through the motions and they checklist. These are things we have to do, and our events are loud and obnoxious, and it's a little bit of a blowing off steam. It's a little bit of seeing your friends at the end of the day. I make it very clear to other people that I consult with on building an ecosystem. Your events have to have high energy, high pace, and good content, and speak in the tone of the entrepreneurs, because at the end of the day, the entrepreneur has 4 options, right? They can come to your event, they can stay at the office, they can go home to their friends, or they can go out with their buddies, and you have to be the best of those 4 options on a Thursday at 4 o'clock.
Yep.
You have to be the best of those things. And if your events are boring, they're going to want to do any of those other 3 things. So I make sure that our speakers have a little personality.
Yep.
I try not to invite boring people to speak at our events. I make it a point, I want to see someone speak before I invite them to speak on my stage. I want to see, are they very funny in a one-on-one conversation, or are they good in a room?
Right.
I need people that are good in a room.
Yeah.
Because I'm entertaining 250 people. And there's a lot of turnover. There's probably 30% turnover at every event, but we always welcome new people. Our events are free and open to the public. We want you to register, but there's no cost. There's no barrier to attend.
Right.
So if you're just curious on what an entrepreneur is, or what is this thing called new, what is an entrepreneur support organization, we invite people to walk right in.
Yeah, it's such an awesome little community ecosystem. Not little, I don't mean to say little, but that was the first event I went to. I truly was just like, holy shit! How have I not been to this yet? I was I was mad at myself. I was like, what the hell am I doing?
That's a challenge. Is how do we get the word out to people like yourself?
Yeah.
We do get a lot of press in the Wilmington Business Journal, but the other papers around town really aren't doing a lot of business news.
Yep.
They've really said we kind of surrendered the business news to the Business Journal.
Yeah.
Well, what if you have some friction with the Business Journal and they don't want to write about you? What is your option? Well, that's why you see me post on LinkedIn so much.
Yeah, you're very active.
I'm my own media channel.
Yeah. No, you absolutely are, and it's amazing how you bring people together just on LinkedIn. Just with myself, you've helped me make several connections, which has been super cool. And man, and I got to say, obviously, I wanted to have you onto the show just because I really am truly interested to learn more. But also, this is my tiny little part where, hey, maybe we can put some more content and some more, awareness out there. Hey guys, come check this out. It's really cool what's going on. There's that.
Yeah. So you asked what is new earlier. We do 5 things. We have events we've talked about. We do communications in our newsletter and media relations. We do mentoring. We do investor prep. And a lot of what we did that hasn't been done here before is advocacy. So I say that I'm on the 3 most important statewide committees for entrepreneurship. Okay. And that helps Wilmington a lot, because when important decisions are in the room, you need to be in the room to represent your area.
Yep.
So I'm on the CED selection for who goes in front of their investor conference.
Yes.
So every year they have an 800 to 1,000 person investor conference, and I'm on the committee that gets to choose which companies go on stage.
Wow.
NCIDEA, so I'm a grant reviewer for NCIDEA.
Yep.
Before this opened, a Wilmington company had never won an NCIDEA grant. Mm-hmm. So I called my friends and said, hey, I've got this facility. If you come to Wilmington, you can have your events here for free. I won't charge you to use the space, and we'll build an audience for you. All you got to do is show up and tell your thing. We'll take care of all the rest.
Yeah.
And so they started coming here, and one of our entrepreneurs won, and then that we're not invited to the party kind of mentality, the isolation that Wilmington had always claimed, all of that disappeared.
Yeah.
And then the third one is the North Carolina Technology Association Awards. So I'm on the awards committee of who wins the annual big awards in front of 800 people in downtown Raleigh. Yep. And last year, guess who won? Opiade.
Yes.
Opiade won the best data analytics and AI company in all of North Carolina.
Unbelievable.
You don't think that opened some eyes of, wait a minute, isn't Raleigh the technology center of the world?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then a little Wilmington company wins in front of all the technology decision makers in the state are in that room. And, you know, from Wilmington, North Carolina, Opiade. You know, I'm loud, I'm standing up and, I'm cheering, and so those are the 5 things that we do. The other thing I've added recently is removing barriers for entrepreneurs of, if there's someone in your way, how can I find a way to go around that person that's blocking you from the assets and the resources that you want,
right? And
say that you need. And again, that's something that I don't think had been done around here before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So your mission is to build an ecosystem in a community that helps people be successful. For two different things. I am trying to help the entrepreneur so we can create some generational wealth in Wilmington that's maybe not from real estate. Yep.
If you look at all the buildings here at UNCW, the names on the buildings, those are all real estate names, right? And the other thing I'm trying to do is to create jobs for the people that are here. If you're a UNCW graduate here 10 years ago, you pretty much had to move out of town to go find that first job that would help you make enough money to pay back your college loan.
I'd like to tell you my story after you finish, because it is like literally exactly what you just mentioned.
So it's well known that when I was working here, they said that the top 100 graduates would go work for Credit Suisse in Raleigh. And now we have companies in Wilmington that have raised money enough that they can pay similar salaries to what the bigger cities. So if you look at Encino, Encino has created generational wealth, right?
Heck yeah.
With an IPO.
It's the cool, man.
And an IPO on Wall Street. And
unbelievable.
That, again, is just like the untapped exit. Yep. This is another exit. We had another exit, a company called Player Space. And that was a very small company, I think 12 people at the most, and they sold to a company down in Houston. And now my friend who's the founder of that company, he hasn't stopped smiling since that check was written. He's the happiest man I've ever seen in the last decade. So, he's a great friend, and he gave me a great compliment once in the paper. He said, Jim would give the shirt off his back to help any entrepreneur. And, I don't owe Todd anything. He doesn't owe me anything. But as long as someone like that gets the effort of what we're trying to do and deliver value.
Yeah. So, how did you find yourself in this role of, being a servant and a public servant to help other people, even over yourself?
I think there's there's a couple things in that. One is my dad was a teacher and a basketball coach for 35 years. Okay. And I consider what I do coaching. I think there's a lot of cheerleading in entrepreneurship support. And some days these entrepreneurs need coaching. They don't need a cheer, they need a kick in the ass. And my dad was a Bobby Knight kind of coach, and I was his player. And, the entrepreneurs make it clear that I replicate that sometimes.
You can't get away with that stuff anymore, can you?
No. But, the entrepreneurs know that they're not gonna give me a weak excuse of why they didn't do something when they promised it to me 2 weeks ago, where I'm trying to help them and they're late delivering the thing that I need to help them.
Help me help you.
Yeah, right. Yep. And so the other part of it was the way I got into this was I was selling websites in Charlotte in the year 2000. and none of my .com, in that .com era before the bust, none of my prospects had any money. So they needed a website for a business they were building, but none of them had any money. So my brain went, well, how do I put more hands in the money of the entrepreneurs? And I was reading about all these events in Silicon Valley and Austin, Texas, and Chicago and New York and Boston of organizations called Round Zero and all these organizations. And I came up with the name First Round. And so I took over a restaurant on a Tuesday night in Charlotte, and the rest is history. We had to, every 6 months, we had to move to a bigger restaurant. And so I had events just like here. Can an entrepreneur meet investors? Well, you got to invite the investors to the event, and the way to get them there is to ask them to speak. And people rarely. I think I'm over inviting 125 investors from the Triangle of Raleigh-Durham to come to Wilmington, and only one person has turned me down.
Wow.
Now that person's on my shit list, but that's a pretty good record. 124 out of 125 is pretty good.
That's pretty damn good.
Yeah. So, the entrepreneurs are there. They meet the service providers like yourself, the law firms, the accounting firms, and they meet some media. Our events grew so fast, we had the media's attention. So the media would come to every event, and they would write about what the speaker said. They would interview some of the entrepreneurs, and this thing just built. And then the .com bust happened, and the crash happened, and then in 2001, September 11th happened, and that my little one-man organization couldn't survive both of those crashes. So I had decided to close down First Round, but I hadn't announced it to anyone. And 3 days later, I got a call from Asheville, North Carolina. Hey, we love what you're doing in Charlotte. Would you consider a full-time job with salary and benefits to come do this in Asheville? And that sounded really good. So I closed it down and moved to Asheville and did that there for the next, 6 years.
Was that like for the county, the city,
It was for the Economic Development Organization. So the state of North Carolina used to have regional economic development organizations, and this was called Advantage West. And it represented the 23 counties west of Charlotte.
Got it.
And so, they were doing traditional recruiting, but how do we build our own economy? How do we support our own entrepreneurs, and they create jobs that are local, and those are the jobs that don't move away, where they're incentivized by someone else. 5 years later, when those incentives expire, someone's going to come and pull them out of your city. And so if you there's a great entrepreneur in the mountains named Tom Dempsey. He has a great company called Sylvan Sport. And it's a 21st century pop-up camper that can go behind a Mini Cooper, but it can pull your kayaks up the mountain and tow them. And then you take the kayaks off, and it folds out to a camper with room for 5 full-size adults. Oh my God. And they were National Geographic Company of the Year on the magazine cover. And that's one of the entrepreneurs that we helped in a variety of ways.
That's right. Cool.
And so when I see, his product win all these design awards, I'm very proud of my friend. It's very cool. Yeah. Because these entrepreneurs become part of my social life too. They become, you put so much of yourself into what they're doing, they become, trusted friends.
Yeah. So then how did you get down to Wilmington then? Did UNCW call you, or did you have some draw to come to Wilmington for some reason?
It's a great story. Not many people know this. There's a guy named Brian McMurdy. He's a well-known headhunter or recruiter that lives here in the Wilmington area. And he had recruited Gary Miller, who was the chancellor at the time. And then Gary Miller... I was personal friends with Brian. He sponsored some of the work that I was doing for the Biotech Center. I worked for an organization called COIN. It's Center of Innovation for Nanobio. So how do you use nanotechnology to go through the blood-brain barrier and cure brain cancer? So nanotechnology delivers drugs to cure cancer. And we had a whole organization around nanotechnology. And I put on great events for this little tiny organization, including we had a former FDA chief who spoke at one of our events. And Brian was one of my sponsors there. And he saw me at an event and I was a little down on myself. And he goes, "What's wrong?" He's like, "I've been trying to get this job at UNCW. They've had this opening for 9 months and I can't get a job interview." The problem was the job listing had a mandate of having an MBA, and I don't have an MBA. I just have my degree in advertising from University of Florida.
Okay.
So I wasn't making it past the resume scan. He doesn't have an MBA, put it in the trash file.
Right.
And so Brian said to me, "Hey, I put the chancellor in his job. I can make a call and you can get an interview tomorrow." And that's really what happened.
Cool.
And I brought a book by a guy from Brad Feld who wrote a book called Startup Community. It's kind of the Bibles for entrepreneur support organizations. And I gave it to the chancellor in my job interview. I said, "If you read this book and this is what you want to happen, then I'm the person to hire for the job." And I got the job.
That's amazing.
That's how I got to UNCW.
You know, there's a common theme in everything that we're talking about, and it's the power of relationships, and it's the power of helping other people and how that all comes back to you.
Right.
I mean, it's like that is the most perfect example of how things work.
Right. Right. I mean, it's networking.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's not. It doesn't have to be internal to the Good Old Boy Network. I have really no formal relationship with Brian. I mean, he's now kind of a friend and a mentor, but he didn't have to do that for me. He didn't know my father. He didn't know my grandfather. He didn't know any family relatives.
Right.
He has no obligation to do that. But he certainly knew what I had done in Durham and Greensboro for this nano organization.
Yeah.
And again, we had really great events with this organization that was really short-lived because it was such a niche, and these organizations were really built during the recession after 2007, and this was around 2010, 2011. The economy hadn't really recovered, so to raise money for this strange nano organization that most people couldn't spell nanotechnology at the time, like, why would I support that? But we had really good events, and we had some great momentum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me just I'll give you the real quick of my story, because what you said is all the the college graduates they leave Wilmington because they want to get a job but
they don't want to leave Wilmington.
They don't want
to leave Wilmington.
Right. Exactly. And it's different. It's so much different now than it was when I graduated, and like part of that is because of the work that you've done along with a lot of other organizations. But I graduated in 2012. I got my master's in accounting, and I knew I wanted Wilmington to be like my long-term home, and there were some good regional firms here, like RSM McLadger, I think was like the biggest firm. But I was like, I want to work for a Big Four. That was like what I wanted to do. And so I left and moved to Raleigh, and worked for Deloitte, and then got into another big corporation, and ultimately it took me almost it took me like 7 years to like get back to Wilmington, to where I was like actually like having a career job that I wanted.
Right.
And so I mean it just my story is exactly kind of what you're talking about, and what I'm doing is not necessarily, I wouldn't call it super entrepreneurial like a tech startup or like like some groundbreaking technology, but hey, I'm taking an old accountant's view and saying, hey, whatever the way it's been done for 150 years or whatever, it's like we're doing it different, because a business owner needs continued advice and support throughout their journey and life cycle, and we're just like one of the people that you put on your team, right? Like, we're going to help you see your business finances clearly, so hey, maybe we can help support the next Encino or the next whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, I believe when the Live Oak Bank people talk, they say that between their three major companies, Live Oak, Encino, and Aperture, they've hired over 1,000 UNCW graduates.
Unbelievable. Right,
which again was not in place when you graduated.
Right.
And now the graduates have an opportunity to stay without taking the beach discount.
Yeah, exactly.
30%, salary off the top, because they know the business owners know that you desperately want to stay at the beach,
Yep.
you know, or the ocean, or whatever attracts you about Wilmington, that you want to stay here, and you'll take that significant discount.
Yeah. So one of the things I was thinking about when you were talking is kind of like the idea is like the chicken or the egg that comes first, right? It's like to get people to come, you have to have some success, but to have some success, you have to kind of do that. And so you mentioned the next glass and that being one of the, would you say, you know, like how did you get involved with those guys, the Taylors, and like, was that one of the?
Yeah. So if you don't know George is really one of the hardest working people I've ever met, despite his kind of success that he had already had. I believe he'd had 5 companies and an IPO. So he had already exited 3 or 4 times in the previous companies. So he was already wealthy, but he still outworked by multiples any entrepreneur that I had ever met. And so when the announcement came that I was opening this facility, I had been hired, he reached out to me and his son Kurt. And I had a meeting with his son over, because this place wasn't ready. So we met across the street at the Harris Teeter. I actually renamed the coffee store like Cafe 803. I'll meet you at the Harris Teeter Starbucks, or it was actually a Port City Java at the time, and I had renamed it. So you meet me over at Cafe 803, and we'll have coffee and we'll talk until this place opens, right? And so I got to know Kurt, and he handed me their business plan and everything, and that's how the relationship started. And I think within 2 or 3 weeks, I invited the North Carolina Technology Association to have an event here. We had a lunch at the Chancellor's boardroom, and there were 12 people there, and the people from North Carolina Technology Association, and that was our very first event.
Yeah.
And I mean, nothing magical came from that, but it opened a relationship to North Carolina Technology Association. And then 8 months later, Next Glass won their Best Startup in North Carolina award.
Awesome.
Right?
Yep.
And when they won that award, it was, because here's what happened. They said, and the winner is Next Glass, an app that gets to know your wine profile, your taste profile for wine. And it's called Next Glass from Wilmington, North Carolina. You could actually hear people get up from their chairs, wipe out their phone, and try to download the app. You know, because they were a bottle or 2 deep at the tables already, right? They had been drinking on, you know, this wasn't the first award of the night, so they had been drinking a little bit. And you get, hey, a wine app, all right, you know, and I was like, okay, we're on to something.
Yeah,
we just woke up 800 people on the potential of the Wilmington ecosystem.
Just like that.
Right? Because again, we're building an ecosystem where people actually want to live.
Right.
Do you want to live on I-40 in the Triangle?
I did.
Unless you're a state fan or a state grad or a Chapel Hill grad, that's why you want to stay in the Triangle.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you probably want to be at the beach.
Yep. Or the mountains, for example.
So we're building an ecosystem on a place where people actually want to live.
Exactly.
And that was my motivating factor. That's what I kept in mind every day is we've got something that other people want. Yep. We just have to build the infrastructure and prove that we have, if not, we have the resources like capital, we have access to it through the Triangle.
Yep.
So last year we had David Hall, who's the managing director of Revolution Capital.
Yes.
And Revolution Capital is Steve Case's venture fund. Steve Case, the founder of AOL, who had the biggest exit in the history of the world, right? When he sold AOL to Time Warner. Right? So now we've got that venture fund coming to Wilmington. And in the article that they wrote about his visit, he called it, we've developed the umbilical cord to the Triangle ecosystem, to the bigger ecosystem.
Yeah.
So we do this better than any city in North Carolina, is that we have this two-way flow of the investors come from the Triangle, they come to Wilmington. When important events happen in the Triangle, we have a carpool that goes up to these events.
Yep.
So we have the highest attendance of any city at CED events. We've got 25 people that make the annual trip. And so these people, they know me because I've been going to that event for 25 years, right?
Yeah.
And so they hear, oh, you're from Wilmington, you know Jim. You know, like, well, Jim kind of suckered me into coming here today, right? I mean, and they both know it's true.
Yeah,
like they know it's true.
Yeah, yeah.
But at the end of the 2 days of that conference, the Wilmington entrepreneurs go, wow, I met some, those are the people I've needed 18 months ago.
Exactly.
I was like, well, I told you to come last year.
Yeah.
Right. And so, you know, I hold the entrepreneurs accountable to those things. So, okay, this is what you said you needed. Here it is. Let's plan of attack. How do we go get that?
So what do you define like the ecosystem as? Like, what does it look like tangibly, intangibly? How do you define that?
It's the entrepreneurs first and foremost. So another mistake that other entrepreneur organizations or the leaders of those organizations make is they tend to snuggle up to the investors, and they're on the side of the investors. And I think that's a really bad mistake, because the investors don't need any damn help, right? They're doing just fine. It's the entrepreneurs that need your help on a day-to-day basis. They need the nurturing.
Yep.
They need the pat on the back or the kick in the ass, depending on their actions. Yep. And so the entrepreneurs are first and foremost. Second is the investors. You've got to have the fuel for these companies. There's a lot of criticism about the venture capital industry, but at the end of the day, you know, the entrepreneurs don't always have generational wealth in their family that somebody can write a check, an ongoing check, you know, while the company is building. So the investors are very important. The service providers are very important. The co-working spaces, you know, the lawyers play a very big role in an ecosystem. If you look in the Raleigh ecosystem, there's a lawyer, Fred Hutchison. He's put $1 million into the ecosystem in the South. Wow. $1 million worth of checks that he's written to organizations to support entrepreneurship over 30 years.
I'd love to be able to say
$1 million.
That's incredible.
Right? So more importantly, the lawyers, you know, they go to the holiday cocktail party, and, you know, your average business guy walks up to the lawyer, hey Fred, you know, what are you working on? Have you found some new entrepreneurs that you see some potential in? Because he only accepts the best companies as clients, right? So they know
if he's working with them, it's
if
probably
he's working with them, or, you know, the other law firms that support us, Neil Bocci and Merrill Mason of Smith Anderson.
Yep.
So that cocktail conversation leads to angel investing. Fred, tell me more about that company. Well, this is what they're doing. They've got an A team for management. You know, they're developing their product. They have an MVP. They've got a client waiting to buy it. And if you have that kind of validation from a professional service provider that's been down the road a million times, and knows the BS knows a entrepreneur from an entrepreneur, then there's a lot of validation in that. And that simple holiday cocktail conversation can lead to an investment. And that's something we desperately need here. Is we need someone in that professional class to speak and validate on behalf of the entrepreneurs that are in the community. We don't have that kind of leadership yet.
What do you, I mean, you say we don't have that type of leadership yet. What has to happen, or what do we need to do to continue to get to that?
Well, it's something we're trying to do in the mentor realm of things, is get the leaders of Encino more involved. You know, now that they've had that IPO and some of them are kind of moving off and doing their own thing, we need to get them involved as mentors to say, hey, I went down the IPO process. Here are the steps. Here are the people that I found helpful along the way, and make an introduction. These are the bad curves in the road to avoid, and how to avoid them. You know, here are some people that made some money when Encino had an exit. Maybe they're interested in becoming, you know, the next angel investor in your company. And we need to find people that are willing to open those doors, and that's been tough to find.
I bet. And it's hard. But I mean, if you think about it, like from where you've come over the past years to where you are now, and now that just the momentum that you have, it might, you know, it's like little exponential growth.
Yeah, I mean, if you looked at the event that you attended in April, we had the Live Oak family of companies on the same stage, and no one had ever done that before.
That was pretty cool.
So we had Encino and Aperture and
Canopy.
Canopy, yeah, that was the third, and no one had ever done that, and so cool. You now have access to those people that led those very successful companies.
Yeah, no, I keep going back to going to that event was a really pivotal point for me. It also just opening up my eyes to like, there's something, without going into some of my plans and vision, but like there's a big world out there, and there's a lot of opportunity, and starting small is a good place to get the training wheels, get the foundation, get the infrastructure. But when I was listening to these guys talk, I was just like I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm thinking like this. Yeah. Like let's think like that.
So let me nail down who was at that event. Yeah. We had the #1 most active venture capital in activity from North Carolina. Yeah. We had the most active venture capital fund from South Carolina. Yep. We had the most active venture capital fund in the whole United States. And we had the Steve Case 150 million top 50 venture capital fund from Steve Case from Washington, D.C.
All here
in one room at the beach during
in Wilmington
during Azalea Festival.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
Oh my gosh.
So that alone was a heavy lift for a one-person organization.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't almost forget, but the rankings that you put out in your newsletter today or yesterday. You can.
Is this vodka? No. Okay.
I don't know. TK might have brought some special juice. I don't know.
So just this week, in the last week, we've been ranked twice the #1 startup ecosystem in the world for cities under 300,000 people. Awesome. So there's two organizations. One's called Startup Blink. They're out of Israel. And the second organization called Startup Genome, which is an American company. Mm-hmm. And they do ecosystem rankings. So this is a 4th year, I believe, of these rankings. And we're now the #1 small city ecosystem in the world.
In the world.
Where we passed Oxford, England. And Oxford, England has been around longer than America has existed as a government. So we've leapfrogged someone from Oxford, England, right, as an ecosystem. The #2 ecosystem in North Carolina, which is actually, I'm more proud of that because if you know the arrogance of the great state of Mecklenburg or the city called Charlotte, we're very proud that they're an 875,000 person city, and we've just leapfrogged them in these international rankings. The top 25 in the United States, despite what city, size of city. Yeah. So
top 25
without any population ranking at all, we're in the top 25 in the United States and number 61 in the world. Again, despite any kind of size ranking.
That's unbelievable. Here in Wilmington.
So a lot of that comes from Canopy, the funds they've raised. It ranks as a startup. Yeah, so in the funding category, right?
So what are the measurements or how are they determining what's #1 or rankings?
So funding for startups, kind of patents received.
Okay.
SBIR grants received. Things like what is your average attendance? So that's something we didn't know 2 years ago, was they only used meetup.com to use the rankings of the participation of the ecosystem.
Got it.
So we were using Eventbrite.
Yes.
And didn't know that Eventbrite didn't count until I read the appendix of the ecosystem rankings where it said we only use meetup.com. Well, we flipped. Yep. So now we use Meetup, and suddenly our participation score went from a 0 to a 4.
Got it.
Right, and so those are the things that add up to why we moved up 32 points in the ranking. Is little things like that we've been actively working on. So a company like Opiate or a company like Duravax have recently received SBIR grants, so that's why our numbers have improved.
Got it.
Because if you read One of the speakers that was at the event was John Hardin, who's the advisor for the governor on science and technology policy in North Carolina. And he does an innovation index ranking about every 5 years.
Yep.
So when I took the job here, he was actually the very first speaker at the CIE, because I wanted him to tell the crowd exactly where we were starting.
Right.
Because if you think your ecosystem is starting at a 7, his was, well, by the way, you're the 24th ranked ecosystem in North Carolina right now in certain factors.
Right.
And we weren't getting SBIR grants. We had $2 million in venture funding over a 5-year stage, right?
Yeah.
And just this year we had, I believe, $5 million in funding from January to April. So we had already leapfrogged that number in the first quarter of the year of 2024. So that tells you we'd come a long way.
Yeah. Well, I would imagine now with these rankings being out, this is just another kind of catalyst to be able to putting Wilmington on the map even more, where people are like, oh, holy crap, like what's going on down there?
So we are getting those entrepreneurs from other cities where they're not receiving assistance. We had, a couple of years ago, someone moved here from Colorado, and we've got a new entrepreneur from Ohio. And they read these articles because they're looking for somewhere to move. They want to get out of wherever they are.
Yeah. And
so they're looking, of course, they're looking for a beach town, right? And, we're the biggest beach town in North Carolina. If you want to go, you can go to Virginia if you want, but it gets a little colder.
Yep.
And Charleston's really expensive. And Florida is Florida.
Yes, Florida is Florida.
I think and again, I'm a University of Florida graduate. I'm not Florida man, but I know him very well. I went to high school with Florida man. We've positioned ourselves really well. We need to find a way to make housing more affordable, but as far as the ecosystem goes, we've come a long way, and we still have a lot of work to do. We need to do a better job of finding people who are interested in investing in minority entrepreneurs. That's been a real challenge. It's challenging no matter who you are, and it's even more challenging for minority entrepreneurs. So we were able to help Carl Rissenik find an investor. Do you know Carl?
I don't know.
So Carl's a UNCW professor. He's got a company called Lapidus Solutions. So they're taking facial recognition software that they've developed and matching it with the insurance industry so they can predict your longevity of life.
Holy smokes.
Yeah, Lapidus Solutions.
Cool, I did not know about that.
They have a lot of clients in Asia which are less concerned about individual privacy.
Right.
Yeah. That ain't gonna fly in America quite yet, but it does well in India and China.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So what would you say in terms of, like, we have plenty of investors or we have plenty of entrepreneurs? What would you say that, like, how is the scale balanced in terms of investment available and investable businesses?
I say we're a town of 3.5 angel groups.
Okay.
And that sounds funny, but we have the Wilmington Investor Network that's been around for 25 years, and they've done a lot of investing, but they haven't done a lot of local investing, which is why Whale was necessary.
Okay.
You have Venture South, which is actually run out of South Carolina, but they have chapters across the South, and they have a high number of members, many more members than I have. But again, how do we get them to consider more local deal flow? They've sent a lot of money outside of Wilmington, so they've taken it, not in every instance, but they've taken some Wilmington investor dollars and sent it to other cities and deals in other cities. And I'd rather keep that money here, right? So we need to improve the deal flow so they find it harder and harder to send that money elsewhere.
So do you think that's like we need to have more investable businesses here?
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
but it takes the education to them to come to the events and learn 3 new things with every event, and they become better entrepreneurs. You know, your 23, 24-year-old who really hasn't had a corporate career but wants to start a startup, and they have an idea, but they haven't looked outside of New Hanover County, whether that idea exists somewhere else,
right, exactly,
with a lot of fundings from somewhere else, right, and they start this idea, and you get 3 pages into their business plan, and you can already name 10 companies that you've heard of that are doing exactly the same thing,
right, exactly,
and are really well funded, right, and so you have to have that, what I call the tough love, ugly baby conversation. Is you've got an ugly baby as a startup. How are we going to pivot this thing, or are you going to shut it down?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we have to work on the deal flow. You know, if you look at our attendance, we have plenty of potential entrepreneurs. We just got to, you know, shave off the hard parts and make them more presentable so they know how to present to an investor. And you haven't been to a Tough Love event, but that's actually one of our events.
I can't wait.
It's not an audience event.
Right.
So it's just one entrepreneur, and I invite 5 grumpy people like myself from outside of town, and we have a Tough Love event, and they give a practice presentation. We give them the layout that we want to see, slide by slide. Here's what we want to see. And still, for the next hour, we're banging away on the advice that they ignored, right? And how do we make this a presentation that's good enough that an investor doesn't immediately say no?
Say no, right.
And then we kind of work that due diligence process, and we try to make them, again, a better entrepreneur. So investors like to say yes when they can't say no. Or the guys from Bull City say, if I want to leave my investor job and go work for that company, that's when we invest.
Right.
Well, we need a lot more of those quality companies.
Yeah, and it takes a ton of practice to get to that level.
Well, that's what we say is the entrepreneurs, you can't just practice your pitch with friends and family.
Right.
Because your aunt is going to wrap her arm around you and say that's the best thing I've ever seen.
Yep.
When, you know, she just wants you to show up at her funeral. Right? She doesn't want to upset you, right? You don't want to have that awkward conversation at Thanksgiving where Auntie didn't write the check for your company because it wasn't a good idea, and she knew it, and she doesn't know anything about business, but even she knew it was a bad idea, right?
Yep.
So it's more likely that your friends and family are gonna, you know, pat you on the back and say that's a fantastic presentation, and if I had an extra $100,000, I'd write that check, but you know, I gotta, So we try to fix the bad presentations before they go live. Yeah, is how we talk about it.
Well, and also one of the things, one of the takeaways I had from the investor buzz-in was the investors talking about, it's like, hey, you don't just like have a phone call, have a pitch, and then you got money in your account. Like, there is a long runway, and I mean, you got to, 12, 18 months,
Well, that's a lot. Yeah, so we tell the entrepreneurs, you need to meet the investors today. Yeah. You know, 6 to 9 months before you need the money. Right. You need to have that first conversation. You need to build rapport. Yep. You don't have to give them your whole business plan, but you've got to shake hands, face to face. I recognize you, you recognize me, you say something so the investor remembers you positively. Right. Right? Yeah. And then, hey, 6 months later, hey, that business I was telling you about, we're now ready to come and talk to you. And they'll take the meeting. Yep. Right? And so, just like you can't go to a bank, you know, what do they say? The banks are good at giving you an umbrella when it's not raining. Right, exactly. Like, you know, if everything's sunny, you don't really need the umbrella.
But, it's like I can't lend because you know your debt coverage ratio and all this. Is like, well, dude, that's why I need the freaking money.
That's right. That's right. But, so you have to build the rapport before you need the money, and you know, it can be a 3-month process, but if you are going to the investor as an entrepreneur and say, hey, I need this money tomorrow, I mean, would you invest in the sinking Titanic, right? That's the That's the relationship that we're talking about. If you're so desperate for this money, there's no way in hell I'm giving it to you.
Right, exactly.
You should have talked to me 6 months ago when you needed to start your raise. And that's why they say for a CEO or an entrepreneur, it's a full-time job raising money.
Yes.
You know, you can be a leader of your team, but it's a full-time job.
Absolutely.
And so you need to hand off some of those leadership responsibilities at the startup, and you need to be focused on raising money.
Absolutely. Another takeaway I had from the meetup was, the conversation, someone asked this question, I think, was the jockey or the horse?
Yep.
And it's like, yes, there's a business and there's an idea, but it's also, there's a person that is going to have to do all this stuff. And, the weight of, hey, I'm investing in you. And part of that, hey, building rapport is like, hey, right. Here's my story. This is what I've done.
Right.
I don't have everything figured out. That's why I need money. And that's why I want someone else, to potentially be part of my advisory board to help me figure this shit out. Right.
Yeah. So you need to realize as an entrepreneur that the brilliant idea you start with is rarely the idea you are exiting with, years later, 5 to 7 years later when you have an exit. So the investors need to know that you have the skills to be flexible enough to pivot when the time comes. Yep. Just like Next Glass and Untapped.
Right.
They saw that it wasn't going to scale, so they made a pivot through an acquisition.
Yep. And
then a few years later they have an exit. So that's been in the investing world for more than 20 years.
I'm sure.
Is I got it, if you watch the Kentucky Derby is normally won by someone who's done it before,
yeah.
Right? And that's why investors love serial entrepreneurs.
Yep.
Or someone like George is a portfolio entrepreneur. He has 3 or 4 businesses going at the same time. So he's got a company called National Speed, and he had True Colors, and he had Untapped, and
yep.
He's got a lot of things going on. So there's portfolio entrepreneurs and then serial entrepreneurs.
Yeah, interesting. What else have we not talked about?
Well, we haven't talked about the investor side. If you wanted to talk about Whale,
let's talk about
the Whale Angel Network is probably the smallest angel network in the United States, and I wish I was kidding. We're a very small group, but we've made 19 investments since 2015.
Okay.
And we're an investor in companies like Opioid.
Yep.
We're an investor in Boreas Monitoring Solutions, and we're an investor in Nereem. So those are
both of which were at the.
That's right.
At the end, was it NC Tech?
I put up my hands, and I was very proud when 2 of our
both of them
portfolio companies, Nereem and Boreas, were number 1 and number 2 in the Biotech Center Venture Challenge, and that was good validation that. We're putting our money in good local companies.
Yep. I've actually been working with Morris from Predicate for quite a while, and to your point of the startup, and also I wanted to say one other thing. At one of the 1 Million Cups sessions, we watched a video on what is a startup, and a startup is defined as a company that's trying to find a viable business model, right? That's. And just what I've seen through working with Morris is where Predicate started, when I first talked to him in I don't know, I can't remember, it's been close to 2 years, to where it is now.
Right.
I'm just like, whoa, this is crazy, how it's come, and talk about raising money as a full-time job. I mean, Morris is just that's all, he's just on the grind, and then he finally got hooked up with you, and things are happening. It's pretty cool.
I'm kind of famous for having a breakfast meeting where the entrepreneur leaves with 3 pages of notes. And then 2 weeks later, I'll contact them and say, where are you on the list? Have you completed that list of 3 pages of notes? So Morris is proven to be one of those entrepreneurs that's very coachable, which is very important. And I'll send him an opportunity, and 2 weeks later he'll say, hey, I got chosen for stage time at CED, or from Dig South in Charleston, or Venture Atlanta that's coming up, or the the 3686 conference in Nashville, Tennessee, and he applied for the Biotech Venture Challenge, and he was in third place, and he won the Coastal Entrepreneur Awards.
Exactly.
So if I send him something, I know that he's going to apply for it. But we're trying to work with him to make him an investable company.
Yeah. And it takes time, but just I think that's a pretty good case study, just from my perspective, because I've seen it so closely. It's just like the road of how it works. And
yeah, it's to be a scalable entrepreneur, you need grit.
Yeah.
You need to be surrounded by people that are supportive and cheer and coach. And sometimes you have to be your own cheerleader, and you're the one that's got to get out of bed and make it happen. And some entrepreneurs have that as an internal fire in the belly, and some people kind of learn to have that.
Yep.
So can we find the entrepreneurs that have a fire in the belly at the relaxed coast of Wilmington, North Carolina? And that's the real challenge when I got here. Is how can we find a solid group of people with the fire in the belly that also have the desire to live at the coast? Which one comes first?
Yeah.
Is your style of life that I want to live the coastal lifestyle, or do you want to be an entrepreneur that lives at the coast? I need the second person.
Yep.
Because as I explained about my time in Asheville, was like pushing Jello up a mountain.
Literally up the mountain.
If you push here, the other part of the Jello comes out on the other side, and it rolls down the mountain.
Yeah.
But their style of life is important, and that's why they live in Asheville.
Right.
And I was not a fit for Asheville, but I was trying to do my work with entrepreneurs. So I find it's different in Wilmington. I find the older people are more the red meat, fire in the belly people. The younger people are very interested in the surfing and such.
Yeah.
And the beer. But
I think like generationally, is that like, the younger generation, and I might be part of it, but it's like, there's this great quote, I forget who it's from, but it's like, it took me 10 years to become an overnight success. And I think that with something that has to do, I don't know what the reason is, but I feel like younger kids today, they look at that outcome, that social media post of, hey, I became successful overnight, but they don't truly realize like what it actually takes. And it's just like, oh, I'm just gonna,
right.
Here's my idea, I'm gonna do it. But, and when I interview, it's like, let's talk about vacation. Let's talk about like, like work from home. And it's like, dude, like, you gotta work.
I think they watch the Facebook movie, the guy that drops out of Harvard and has a very quick success,
right.
But even Tom Rue of NC Idea posted today on Twitter. He retweeted my post about us making this #1 ecosystem, kind of put that overnight success ecosysteming joke in there. Like, we've been at this since 2013.
Right, exactly.
It is kind of a laggard ranking. We've been doing these things to build up to this. It wasn't a 1-year hop to make us into this. It's been a 12-year slog of really hard work and pushing the limits of relationships and what are the limits of your friendship? How hard can you push this entrepreneur to before and on the downside of that is a couple years ago we had an emotional intelligence workshop that was, I think, 6 different seminars, workshops on how do you have better communications at the office so you don't take that stress at home. Because this was kind of the first time that Wilmington had scalable companies, and that adds a stress to a relationship and a marriage. And we were starting to see some stress in the marriages of our entrepreneurs, and we kind of hit the brakes and said, okay, let's give you these emotional tools on how to better communicate so you reduce the stress and you don't take that stress home to your spouse and your kids.
Yep.
And that was, the entrepreneurs seem to absorb those lessons.
Yeah. I'm definitely someone that can empathize with that. It's, you've got your commercial goals, and then you've got your family life, and, balancing that is really difficult. You got to have a supportive, not just the ecosystem, right, of the entrepreneurs, but also, the family and the friends that, are also making sacrifices.
Right.
Right.
But the mentors, if you have the right mentor asks more questions than gives advice. So if they can see kind of the diagnosis, if you will, of hey, you need to slow down, and you need to spend some time, and you need to take that vacation, and if the world is taking Memorial Day off, no one's going to take your call, no one's going to answer your email. You need to spend that weekend re-engaging with your family.
Yep. No. Well, I'm super excited that I've been connected with you, and thank you for being so welcoming and helping me from from barely knowing each other.
Sure.
I think maybe the intro from Dallas probably helped a little bit.
No, I answer those LinkedIn just as fast for anyone. You ask them, they're
cool. Awesome.
This is my life. This is what I do. This is where I spend a majority of my time.
Yeah.
So running New and Whale, among other things. So I thank you for your support, your firm support of our organization, and I think we will push each other to continue to grow.
Totally. Yep. I'm with you, man. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cool.
Clear?
All right.
So Kim now a client?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. She's